In the rolling hills of McLean, Virginia, just 20 minutes from the marble monuments of Washington, stands a white brick Georgian mansion that has witnessed more American tragedy than perhaps any private residence in the nation's history. This is Hickory Hill, and its story is woven with threads of ambition, brilliance, unimaginable loss, and the haunting question of whether some places carry the weight of sorrow in their very foundations. The mansion sits on Chainbridge Road, its elegant facade presiding over what remains of once sprawling grounds. To pass by it today, you might see only another stately home in one of America's wealthiest suburbs. But the walls of Hickory Hill hold secrets that stretch back over a century and a half, beginning long before the Kennedy name became synonymous with both American royalty and American tragedy. The land itself was purchased in 1846 by George Walters, a carpenter and farmer who held convictions as strong as the hickory trees that dotted his property. Walters was an abolitionist, a man whose principles ran so deep that he refused to use slave labor in an era when it was commonplace throughout Virginia. He was a Quaker, committed to peace and equality, and he built his home on a hill crowned with those ancient hickory trees, some of which were already 300 years old when he arrived. The original frame house that stood on the property met a violent end in 1862, consumed by flames when a servant accidentally knocked over a candle. This was during the darkest days of the Civil War, when Union and Confederate forces clashed across Virginia's countryside. Though rumors would later claim that the house was destroyed in battle when it served as headquarters for Union General George McClellan, historians have debunked this myth. The truth was more mundane, but no less devastating to Walters, who watched his home burn. Undeterred, the Quaker pacifist built again, this time in brick. He constructed a 3-story structure with a distinctive mansard roof and dormer windows, a French architectural style that was gaining popularity in America. The red bricks were made from clay dug from the back of his own property. It was unusual for the area, where most homes were still wooden structures. The house rose like a statement of permanence, of determination to endure. But tragedy seemed drawn to the hilltop. In 1906, lightning struck the mansion. The following year, another devastating fire ravaged the structure. George Walters had died in 1890, and his widow Mary struggled to maintain the property. When she passed away in 1910, the family heirs could not agree on who should inherit the estate. A court ordered it sold, and in 1916, the property changed hands for $18,000. The buyer was James Patrick Spear, known as Pat, a Washington dentist who practiced in the same building where Clara Barton had conducted her work with Civil War veterans. Spear moved into Hickory Hill with his wife Susan and their 5 younger children. But the mansion's troubles were far from over. The marriage was poisoned by Pat's alcoholism and infidelity. Susan filed for divorce in 1922, but she died the following January before the proceedings could conclude. Pat remarried quickly in March of 1924, but his reckless lifestyle had caught up with him. Drowning in debt, he was forced to sell Hickory Hill just 7 months later. By 1925, Pat Spear was dead. The property was purchased by Frank Lyon, a prominent Arlington developer whose name still graces Lyon Park and Lyon Village in Arlington. Lyon was a man of vision and means, and he saw potential where others had seen only trouble. He took a radical step. He gutted the fire-damaged Victorian structure and transformed it completely. The old-fashioned mansard roof was removed, and in its place rose a Georgian colonial mansion with clean lines and classical proportions. This was the house that would become famous, the house that presidents would know. Lyon initially installed his real estate partner in the home, but eventually moved in himself with his wife Georgia. They lived there for 12 years before selling to Leo Rocca, one of the first automobile dealers to advertise on television. But the Roccas stayed only 5 years. Officially, flooding at Chain Bridge made it difficult for Rocca to conduct his business. Their granddaughter later revealed a different truth. The family simply could not find adequate domestic staff during the war years, when workers were in short supply. In 1941, just days after being confirmed to the Supreme Court, Justice Robert Jackson and his wife Irene purchased Hickory Hill. Jackson was no ordinary jurist. He had served as Attorney General and would go on to become the chief United States prosecutor at the Nuremberg war crimes trials, confronting the architects of the Holocaust in the most important legal proceeding of the 20th century. For 13 years, the Jacksons lived at Hickory Hill, the house filled with the grave deliberations of a man who wrestled with questions of justice, evil, and human nature at their most fundamental level. When Justice Jackson died suddenly in 1954, his widow decided to sell. In October of 1955, the house was purchased for $125,000 by a young senator from Massachusetts named John Fitzgerald Kennedy and his beautiful wife, Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy. Jackie had grown up just 2 miles down the road at Marywood, and she knew these Virginia hills well. The couple moved into Hickory Hill with hopes and dreams, with plans for a future that seemed limitless. It was here, in a room overlooking those ancient hickory trees, that John Kennedy wrote his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Profiles in Courage. The work explored moral courage in political life, examining senators who had stood against the tide of public opinion to follow their conscience. The irony would not be lost on history. Kennedy wrote about courage, while his own would soon be tested in ways he could never imagine. But Hickory Hill was not destined to be JFK's home. In 1956, Jackie suffered a devastating miscarriage. The loss shattered something in the couple, and they decided the 13-bedroom mansion was too large, too remote, too filled with what might have been. They sold it to John's parents, Joseph and Rose Kennedy, who in turn rented it to John's younger brother Robert and his wife Ethel. The Robert Kennedys needed space. By 1956, Ethel was pregnant with their 5th child, and more would follow. In 1957, they officially took possession of Hickory Hill, and it was then that the house entered its most legendary period, transforming into what Arthur Schlesinger would call the most spirited social center in Washington. Robert Kennedy, known as Bobby to family and friends, was unlike his glamorous older brother. He was intense where Jack was charming, introspective where Jack was outgoing. Bobby was the family enforcer, the one willing to make hard decisions and endure being disliked. But Ethel Kennedy, whom he had married in 1950, brought out something else in him. She was vivacious, mischievous, utterly fearless. Where Bobby tended toward brooding, Ethel was effervescent. Together, they created something unique. Hickory Hill became a wonderland of organized chaos. The Kennedys began accumulating animals at an astonishing rate. There were dogs and horses, naturally, but also 4 ponies, 15 pigeons, 22 goldfish, 40 rabbits, geese, chickens, and most remarkably, a sea lion named Sandy who lived by the pool until he pushed 8-year-old Kathleen Kennedy into the water, one too many times, and was banished to the National Zoo. Time magazine called it a gay and lively home, though that description hardly captured the controlled pandemonium that reigned. The grounds were expanded to include an Olympic-sized swimming pool, a children's pool, a tennis court, paddocks for the horses, and a pool house designed by architect John Carl Warneck to resemble a small French manor. Inside the main house, the red front door opened onto rooms filled with historically significant documents and artifacts, beautiful antiques mixed with comfortable family furniture, books everywhere because Ethel was an avid reader, and photographs covering every available surface. But what made Hickory Hill truly legendary were the people who passed through that red door. Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense, planning the Vietnam War strategy. Edward R. Murrow, the journalist who had stood up to MC Carthyism. Astronaut John Glenn, fresh from orbiting Earth. Sir Laurence Olivier, and Gene Kelly titans of stage and screen Judy Garland, and John Lennon, musical immortals. Rachel Carson, whose book Silent Spring would launch the environmental movement. Robert Frost, perhaps America's greatest poet, who attended a poetry writing contest at the house. Harry Belafonte, who taught guests how to dance the twist. B.B. Kennedy had an insatiable curiosity and an intellectual hunger that drove him to create what became known as the Hickory Hill Seminars. Working with Harvard historian Arthur Schlesinger, he organized a series of lectures and discussions that would attract upwards of 60 people, all of Washington's intellectual elite. Leading thinkers from every discipline would present, and then the Kennedys would lead the questioning, sparing no one. The conversations ranged from education policy to the existence of God, from psychology to foreign affairs. The seminars were so successful that other Washington society matrons began hosting their own imitations. But Hickory Hill was also the scene of the legendary Kennedy Touch football games, contests that were less about friendly recreation and more about blood sport. The family was notoriously competitive, playing by their own rules. George Plimpton, the writer and socialite, recalled that if you were going out for a pass, you had to fly. Bobby would grow sour if you missed one. Ethel once bit Plimpton on the ankle during a particularly intense match. Gerald Tremblay, Bobby's law school friend, summed it up perfectly. The whole idea was to relax in a violent fashion. The dinner table at Hickory Hill could seat 18, and Ethel presided at one end while the eldest child, usually Joe, sat at the other. There was constant conversation, questions flying, ideas being tested. Activities were carefully scheduled: tennis at 9 in the morning, sailing at 11, a full baseball game with 18 players every afternoon at 3, dinner promptly at 7. Ethel ran her household like a military campaign, though one where anything could happen. Indeed, President John Kennedy himself rarely visited Hickory Hill, preferring less strenuous settings in his off hours. He was by nature less of an earnest self-improver, and friends speculated that he may have frowned on the rowdier aspects of the place. Speechwriter Richard Goodwin, who knew both brothers well, observed that the openness and rollicking family atmosphere clearly reflected Bobby's personality rather than Jack's. If you loved this deep dive into American history, please subscribe to our channel for more untold stories of the people and places that shaped our nation. By 1960, the energy at Hickory Hill was channeled into politics. John Kennedy ran for president, and Bobby served as his campaign manager. Ethel threw herself into campaigning, proving to be a natural. Her daughter Kathleen would later recall that her mother instinctively noticed undecided voters at fundraisers and would charm them into support. She was terrified of airplanes, but went with Bobby almost everywhere, because that was what you did for family. When John Kennedy won the presidency, he appointed Bobby as Attorney General, a controversial decision that smacked of nepotism but one that would prove consequential. At 35, Bobby Kennedy became the second youngest Attorney General in American history. He used his position to pursue organized crime with unprecedented vigor and to cautiously, then more forcefully, support the civil rights movement. The Kennedy children kept coming. By 1959, there were 9. Christopher arrived in July of 1963. The house bulged with life, with noise, with the boundless energy of a family that seemed touched by fortune. Ethel was in her element, orchestrating the chaos with unflappable cheer. For several years, the family hosted an annual children's pet show at Hickory Hill to benefit charity, bringing bears and elephants to the lawn, along with more conventional pets. One child even brought pet rocks as a joke. Then came November 22nd, 1963. It was a pleasant autumn day at Hickory Hill. Bobby and Ethel were having lunch by the pool with 2 of Bobby's Justice Department associates. The phone rang. It was FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who detested the Kennedys, calling with news that he delivered in a cold, flat voice. President Kennedy had been shot in Dallas. The wounds appeared mortal. Time stopped at Hickory Hill. Bobby, the tough guy, the enforcer, the one who protected the family, was shattered in an instant. Ethel, the devout Catholic, who attended Mass faithfully, held steady through sheer force of faith. "He is in heaven looking down on us," she told her sister after the funeral. "Bobby and I will be with him one day ourselves. We will all be together." But Bobby could not be consoled so easily. A journalist friend who saw him weeks after the assassination described him as crushed beyond hope, mentally, spiritually, and physically. The brother he had served, protected, advised, and loved was gone, murdered in broad daylight on a Dallas street. And with him died Bobby's role, his purpose, his place in the world. He was no longer the Attorney General serving his brother, the President. He was just Bobby Kennedy, trying to figure out what came next. Hickory Hill became a place of mourning. The laughter and parties did not return immediately. Bobby would walk the grounds alone, struggling with depression and a crisis of faith. He read Greek tragedy, philosophy, anything that might help him make sense of senseless violence. Ethel worried about him but maintained her determined optimism, focusing on their children, on keeping life moving forward. In 19 decided to run for the United States Senate from New York. It was seen by some as a carpetbagging move, since he had no real connection to the state, but he won decisively. Hickory Hill remained the family headquarters, but Bobby now divided his time between Virginia, New York, and Washington. He threw himself into his Senate work, becoming increasingly vocal about poverty, racial injustice, and eventually the Vietnam War. The relationship between Bobby and President Lyndon Johnson, who had succeeded his brother, deteriorated into mutual hatred. Johnson saw Bobby as a constant reminder of the martyred president, a living rebuke. Bobby saw Johnson as a usurper who was betraying his brother's legacy, particularly in Vietnam. The bad blood poisoned Washington politics, but tragedy was not finished with the Kennedys. Ethel's life had already been touched by loss. Her parents had been killed in a plane crash in 1955, and her brother died in another plane crash in 1966. But nothing prepared her for what was coming. In 1968, Bobby Kennedy decided to run for president. The country was being torn apart by Vietnam, by racial violence, by generational conflict. Bobby believed he could heal these divisions, could fulfill what he saw as his brother's interrupted promise. Ethel was by his side, pregnant with their 11th child, campaigning with the same tireless energy she had brought to every Kennedy campaign. On June 5, 1968, Bobby won the California Democratic primary, virtually guaranteeing him the nomination. He gave his victory speech at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, Ethel standing beside him, glowing with triumph. When he finished, he was led through the hotel kitchen as a shortcut to a press conference. In that kitchen, a young Palestinian man named Sirhan stepped forward with a revolver. He fired 8 shots. Bobby Kennedy fell to the floor, mortally wounded. Ethel pushed through the crowd to reach him, cradling his head. He died 26 hours later, never regaining consciousness. He was 42 years old. Ethel returned to Hickory Hill, now a widow at 40, pregnant with her 11th child. Friends rallied around her, expecting depression, breakdown, collapse. They were shocked by her composure, though some noted sudden mood swings and an edge to her voice that had not been there before. She refused to wallow. She attended Mass. She focused on her children. She moved forward because the alternative was unthinkable. On December 12, 1968, 6 months after her husband's assassination, Ethel gave birth to Rory Kennedy. Ted Kennedy, the youngest Kennedy brother, was with her at the hospital, helping her name the child. He had become a surrogate father to Bobby's children, though he carried his own demons and would soon face his own scandal at Chappaquiddick. Hickory Hill, after Bobby's death, became a different place. The structure remained the same. The grounds were still beautiful, but something essential had changed. Ethel tried to maintain the routines. the activities, the sense of purpose. But raising 11 children alone, with the oldest not yet 18 and the youngest not yet born, was overwhelming. The children ranged from 17-year-old Kathleen to newborn Rory, and each one dealt with their father's murder differently. Many who knew the family said that without Bobby's influence, the children ran wild. Barbara Gibson, Rose Kennedy's longtime secretary, recalled seeing the younger ones, like Max and Rory, up on the roof of Hickory Hill. "You would worry that someone was going to fall and kill himself," she said. The house that had been organized chaos under Bobby and Ethel's joint control became simply chaotic under Ethel alone. The older children felt the loss more keenly. David Anthony Kennedy, the fourth child born in 1955, seemed particularly haunted. He had been watching television when his father was shot and saw the assassination replayed endlessly on the news. The trauma scarred him deeply. He turned to drugs as a teenager, and despite multiple attempts at rehabilitation, he could not escape his addiction. On April 25, 1984, David Kennedy was found dead in a Palm Beach hotel room. He was 28 years old, killed by an overdose of cocaine, Demerol, and Mellaril. His mother's faith was tested again, but she endured. But the curse of Hickory Hill was not satisfied. Michael Lemoyne Kennedy, the sixth child born in 1958, seemed to have found success. He became a lawyer, married, had 3 children. But on December 31, 1997, during a family ski vacation in Aspen, Colorado, Michael was playing a game of ski football, tossing a football while skiing downhill. He lost control and hit a tree. He was 39 years old. Ethel Kennedy faced each loss with the same steely faith. She told people that nobody gets a free ride, that suffering was part of life, that God had a plan even when it was incomprehensible. She continued living at Hickory Hill, continued raising her children, and now her grandchildren, continued her advocacy work through the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Human Rights, which she had founded after Bobby's death. The tragedies multiplied. In 1999, John F. Kennedy Jr., Ethel's nephew, died in a plane crash along with his wife and sister-in-law in 2002. Ethel's nephew, Michael Skakel, was convicted of murdering 15-year-old Martha Moxley in Greenwich, Connecticut in 1975, a case that became a media sensation and brought more scandal to the family name. In 2019, Ethel's granddaughter Saoirse Kennedy Hill, daughter of Courtney, was found dead at the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport. She was 22 years old, another apparent overdose. The losses seemed never-ending, unimaginable. Friends said that Ethel allowed herself tears in private, at Mass when she was alone in a pew, but she would not make her grief other people's burden. By 2003, Hickory Hill had become too much for Ethel to maintain. The house needed extensive repairs. There was no central air conditioning. The electrical and plumbing systems were hopelessly outdated, and the property had 13 bedrooms but no garage. She put it on the market for $25 million, 5 times its assessed value. It was, as one of Bobby's former aides said, like selling Mount Vernon. The house represented more than a century of American history, from abolitionist Quakers through Civil War fires to Supreme Court justices to the heart of the Kennedy political dynasty. For 6 years, Hickory Hill sat on the market. Ethel withdrew it briefly, unable to let go. Finally, in December 2009, tech magnate Alan Dabier purchased the property for $8.25 million. Ethel was allowed to choose one item from the estate as a family heirloom to take with her. Each of her children chose one item. Her daughter, Kerry, picked a 4-foot-high urn planter that had stood by the flagpole, a piece that had watched over the property through all its transformations. The Dabiers spent 3 years modernizing Hickory Hill while carefully preserving its historic facade. They gutted the interior, updated all the systems, added a wing, reconfigured the driveway, converted the horse barn for storage and office space. They understood they were stewards of something larger than themselves, a piece of American history that needed to be preserved. Today, Hickory Hill stands much as it did when Frank, lion gave it its Georgian face in the 1920s, a white brick mansion presiding over carefully manicured grounds. The ancient hickory trees that gave the estate its name are mostly gone now, victims of age and storms. But the house endures, beautiful and serene, its tragic history hidden behind that elegant facade. Ethel Kennedy never fully left Hickory Hill, not spiritually. She moved to the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport, but remained fiercely devoted to Bobby's memory, to their children, to the causes they had championed together. In 2014, President Barack Obama awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, recognizing her dedication to social justice, human rights, environmental protection, and poverty reduction. She had created countless ripples of hope to effect change around the world, he said. She was an emblem of enduring faith and enduring hope, even in the face of unimaginable loss and unimaginable grief. On October 10, 2024, Ethel Kennedy died at age 96 from complications of a stroke. She left behind 9 surviving children, 34 grandchildren, and 24 great-grandchildren, all of whom loved her dearly. She had outlived her husband by 56 years, had buried 2 of her 11 children, had seen her family name associated with both extraordinary achievement and repeated tragedy. The question that haunts anyone who studies Hickory Hill is whether the tragedies are simply terrible coincidence, or whether there is something deeper at work. The house has witnessed more than its share of fires, financial ruin, broken marriages, and violent death. Is it cursed, or is it simply that the ambitious and the famous are more visible when fortune turns against them, their private sorrows becoming public spectacle? George Walters, the abolitionist who first named the place, built his house on principles of peace and justice. Yet his home burned twice, and his family lost everything. Pat Spear, the dentist, saw his marriage, his fortune, and his health destroyed. The Kennedys brought unprecedented glamour and power to Hickory Hill, but they also brought it more grief than any house should hold. Perhaps Hickory Hill is simply a mirror, reflecting back the best and worst of those who live there. The Quakers' principles, the Justices' integrity, the Kennedys' ambition and courage, but also their recklessness and the violence that seemed drawn to them like a magnet. The house stands as a monument, not just to one family, but to the American century itself, with all its promise and all its pain. When you drive past Hickory Hill today on Chain Bridge Road, you see only an elegant mansion, its white bricks glowing in the Virginia sunshine. You cannot see the ghosts that walk its halls. George Walters watching his house burn, Justice Jackson preparing for Nuremberg, John Kennedy writing about courage, Ethel and Bobby receiving the news that the president is dying, Ethel returning from Los Angeles, a widow with 10 children and 1 on the way, David Kennedy fighting demons he could never escape, Michael Kennedy's empty chair at Christmas dinner. The house keeps its secrets well, but if you stop and listen, if you stand beneath what remains of those ancient hickory trees, you might hear the echoes of children playing, of intellectual debates running late into the night, of laughter and parties, and a family that burned so bright and paid such a terrible price for their brilliance. You might understand why some have compared Hickory Hill to Mount Vernon, why this private home has become a national landmark, why its story matters. Because Hickory Hill is more than a house, it is a chronicle of American ambition, American tragedy, and American resilience. It is a reminder that greatness and suffering often walk hand in hand, that the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows, that no amount of wealth or power can shield us from fate. And it is a testament to the human capacity to endure, to rebuild, to keep going, even after everything has been taken away. Ethel Kennedy's favorite saying, learned through bitter experience, was that nobody gets a free ride. We all face loss. We all face pain. We all must find a way to carry on. Hickory Hill stands as proof that we can, that we do, That the house can burn and the family can be shattered and the dreams can be murdered, but something essential survives. The red door still opens. The rooms still fill with light. The grounds still bloom in spring. And somewhere, in the bones of the house itself, the story continues, waiting for whoever comes next, ready to witness whatever history has yet to unfold. That is the dark story behind Hickory Hill, the Kennedy family estate that has seen more than 150 years of American life at its most triumphant and most tragic. It is a story without a clear ending, because the house still stands, and every house is ultimately defined by the people who live within it. What happened at Hickory Hill shapes how we understand the Kennedys, how we understand American power, how we understand the price of public life. As you leave Hickory Hill behind, as you drive back toward Washington and the marble monuments to the great and the fallen, you carry with you a different understanding of American history. Not the sanitized version taught in schools, not the mythologized Camelot of popular memory, but something raw and more real. A story of flesh and blood people who reached for greatness, achieved it, and discovered that greatness demands a sacrifice that no one should have to pay. If you found this journey through history compelling, if it changed how you see the Kennedy legacy, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We tell the stories behind the stories, the human truths behind the historical facts, because understanding our past is the only way to make sense of our present. Thank you for watching. And remember, every house has a story, but some stories echo through generations, shaping how we understand ourselves and our nation. Hickory Hill is one of those stories, dark and bright, tragic and inspiring, uniquely American in its mixture of triumph and loss.